In 1977, Queen released the song We Are the Champions, and to this day it is still a relevant and iconic anthem. There are a lot of reasons why the song is so popular and so well received, and I think one of those reasons is because of the absolutely perfect chord progression it is constructed from. So in this video, what I want to do is take a deep look at that chord progression and try to figure out how and why it works and how it relates back to some of the music theory that I've taught on this channel. We're going to see some things like secondary dominant chords, modulations, and modal mixture, as well as some things that I've actually never seen before. So to get started, let's just take a look at these first few chords that introduce our verse section. It sounds like this. We have a C minor, and then we have this collection of notes, which is a C, an F, a B flat, and a D. And these two chords are played in 6/8 time. And the melody over the top sounds something like this.
I've paid my dues.
Time after time. So what we can hear is that we have a strong C minor tonality, right? C minor feels like home right now. So we might want to just make the assumption that we're in the key of C minor. And clearly our first chord is C minor. The second chord though, this C, F, B flat, and D, what chord do we call this? Well, it could have a few different names, and the first chord I'm thinking of is it's clearly just a B flat major triad. These three notes are a B flat major triad, and then we're just playing a C on the bass. So we could call this just a B flat slash C. That's a totally acceptable chord name. And if you look at the key of C minor, which we think we're in right now, you'll see B flat is just the seventh chord in the key of C minor. If I'm in C minor, I can go back to a B flat major, and it sounds just fine. However, this isn't quite what I'm hearing when I hear this chord. I'm actually hearing more of a 5 chord. In the key of C minor, the 5 chord is G minor, and you can extend it to a G minor 7. And later on, the bass is actually going to play some G notes. So I actually want to interpret this collection of notes. I want to interpret this as a G minor 7 slash C, because later on we are going to hear it as a context of G minor. And it feels more like a 1 to 5 change. Here's a C minor to a G minor. And that feels more like what we were just hearing than if I play a 1 to a 7 to B flat. So long story short, we're just going to call this chord progression C minor, and then we're going to call it G minor 7 slash C, but I would accept other names there as well. So we're going to cycle between those two chords a few times, and then we're going to introduce an E flat major chord, which is going to be really bright, really warm. It's going to kind of feel like the sun is coming out, and the melody on top, and bad mistakes, I've made a few. Now, E flat major is the 3 chord in C minor, and E flat major is the relative major key of C minor. So I'm going to think of this as a relative modulation because all of a sudden E flat really feels like home. And when we use all these chords and C minor feels like home, we're in the key of C minor. But if we use all these chords and E flat major feels like home, we're in the key of E flat major. They are the same key, but the tonality really makes a difference. What is home bass? For now and for the rest of the song, C minor will no longer be our home bass. So it's kind of deceptive to say that we're in the key of C minor. From now on, I'm going to call this the key of E flat major, and I'm going to retroactively change those Roman numerals. Instead of calling this a 1 to a 5, I'm actually going to call it a 6 chord to a 3 chord, because that's really what it would be if we think of E flat major as our tonic. But that soft little progression changes into something really exciting and energetic to kind of give us momentum going into the chorus. So we're going to go from this E flat major to a B flat over D to a C minor to an F to a B flat. And if we look at those chords one by one, it makes perfect sense. E flat's our tonic, B flat over D, well, that's just our 5 chord. We've inverted our 5 chord though. And then we stop off at the 6 chord. Notice that it doesn't feel like home, right? It did feel like home, but right now it just feels like a pit stop to get to F7. And then after F7, we're going to go to B flat, which is the dominant chord. Now that F7 was out of key. That F7 is a secondary dominant. It leaves the key temporarily, but it resolves us to that B flat chord, which is our 5. So F7 is the 5 of 5, the 5/7 of 5, just a secondary dominant that helps us resolve back to this 5 chord. Now those first 3 chords are extremely common, where you have your 1 chord, and then you invert your 5 chord, and then you play your 6 chord. And a lot of times we'll just follow that up with like a 5 or a 4. And that's like really common, really cliche, not really unique. What is unique though is to interrupt it with a secondary dominant. I feel like that gives it a lot more interest right there. And also if you look at just those last few chords there, C minor to F7 to B flat, that's a 2-5-1 in the key of B flat. So we have that little movement there helping us land onto B flat. And B flat is the dominant chord, right? We're in the key of E flat, and we've played this B flat chord. They're gonna hang out on this B flat chord for a little too long, and you know what that's supposed to do, right? 5 chords are supposed to take us back to our tonic, and we're supposed to land there, and that's not what they give you. Instead, they give you this out of the middle of nowhere. They jump you up to a C, which is totally out of key, but C will launch you into the key of F, and that's where the choruses are going to begin. Now, over that 5 chord, there's a lot happening, and you actually have to listen very closely to hear it all going on. But essentially, Freddie Mercury ends up singing these little triads here. He's got like an A flat major triad, and then an E augmented triad, and then an F minor triad, and that's all kind of pivoting back to that B flat chord. So he's singing like a C, B flat, C, B flat, C, B flat. At the same time, he's singing an A flat to F, A flat to F, A flat to F, and then the low harmony just goes E flat, E, and then F. And you put those together, you get this weird little chromatic thing going on, and it's all happening over the note B flat. But I want to bring up, you don't want to always be using chord names to try to describe everything. Sometimes you just want to look at the sheet music, because to try to parse this as a chord progression when each one of these little triads I'm talking about only takes up like an eighth note, it doesn't really seem like an efficient or convenient way to convey this information. So hopefully you get the idea of what's going on there, but actually compressing it all into a chord name to like strum on your guitar, I don't really think is that practical of an idea. Anyways, moving on, we had our hilarious 5 chord that jumps up to C, and that is going to be the 5/7 of 2, but it just helps us modulate into that key of F. So now we're a whole step higher than we were before, and we get to play our chorus, which is actually a very simple chord progression. F major, A minor, D minor, and then B flat to C. And that's just a tonic, a 1 chord, and then a 3 chord, a 6 chord, and then the 4 and the 5. And that's really simple stuff. I mean, that's so simple you might have accidentally written it when you were following my 3 rules on how to write a chord progression. It's really basic, generic, cliche stuff. But I do want to bring up the fact that this F major to A minor, that's a really sad change. That's about as sad of a chord change as you're going to find in a major key, going from the 1 to the 3. And I've made an entire video on that change from the tonic to the mediant. And even after that, we go to the sad D minor. So like, what's all that sad stuff doing in my song about victory, right? Doesn't that seem a little out of place? Well, this is explained in the lyrics, and hopefully you get the idea. I've paid my dues. It's been no bed of roses. We'll keep on fighting till the end. Not we'll keep on relaxing and being awesome till the end. We have to keep this up. And that's a burden, right? Any champion, anybody who's experienced a real victory knows that it came at the expense of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and pain. And I think a real champion's anthem would reflect that, the dark side of that success as well. I feel it would almost be arrogant and inappropriate to write a victory song that's all just like big major chords and epic, and you know, it doesn't really reflect the reality of what a real victory looks like. And I feel like that emotional sorrow within this victory song might be one of the reasons why we resonate with it so well. Anyways, after we do that really basic progression, F, A minor, D, and then the 4 and the 5, we do almost the same thing for another F, and then another A minor. But now we just go straight to the B flat, and then we do this lovely scale run. And what we did there is just walk down the F major scale. We went A and G, and then we stopped off on F sharp instead of landing on F. Now on that F sharp, we're going to play an F sharp diminished chord. And you might wonder where that comes from, but if you look what happens next, we're going to end up on a G minor 7 chord. And that's the 2 chord. And you can basically approach any chord in the key from a half step underneath it just by playing a diminished 7th there. So if I wanted to get to my 2 chord, right, my 2 chord's G minor 7, if I want to get here, a great way to do it is to play the dominant chord of G minor 7, that would be D7. That'll take me back to G minor 7. But I could also do a secondary leading tone chord, and you just go back a half step to F sharp, and you play a full diminished chord there, or even a half diminished would work as well. But a full diminished is going to give us that really nice crunchy resolution back to our G minor 7. Now we could also parse this F sharp diminished 7th as being a D7 flat 9. It's just being played over F sharp. There's a lot of tones that are similar there. The only thing is in F sharp diminished, you don't have access to an open D note, a regular D, and in D7 flat 9 you do. And Brian May actually at the very last second, he lets a D note ring through. So it might give it more credence or more credibility to this idea of a D7 flat 9, but really I'd accept either chord name right there. They both serve the same purpose. They both serve dominant function to get us to G minor 7 for the next part of the song, that we are the champions And right there, it is a G minor 7, but the vocal harmonies over that next part actually end up spelling out a little bit of a C7 over my G minor 7. And that's all diatonic. That's all going to be in the key. That 2 chord and everything that's happening on top of it has not left the key. However, right after that, we go into the best 2 measures of the entire song. We borrow the 4 chord, which is B flat minor, and we borrowed that from F minor. What we also did is we added the natural 6th in from B flat, and we get a B flat minor 6. Really beautiful chord. And I want you to look at the notes of this B flat minor 6. We have a B flat, a D flat, an F, and a G. Those 4 notes spell out a B flat minor 6th. And those are the notes that Freddie Mercury is belting out as part of the harmony lines. Now, if you took just that F note and if you flatted it, if you basically play a B flat minor 6, find all the Fs and flat them, they become Es, and you're left with the notes of a full diminished chord, a diminished 7th chord. And that could be a B flat diminished, a D flat diminished, an E diminished, a G. I don't care what name you call it because it's gonna kind of be a little murky here. But Brian May just ascends up through those notes. If you listen to his guitar part, he plays B flat, E, G. And that's happening while Freddie Mercury is singing the notes of this B flat minor 6 chord. And eventually those harmonies kind of change a little bit to match the diminished tonality afterwards.
We are the champions.
So really what we've got is a measure of B flat minor 6, and then the diminished really comes out. We have an E diminished with an added 11, because that's the note that Freddie Mercury's singing. He's singing that note A on top, and then it goes to a regular G full diminished. So again, B flat minor 6, and then E diminished with an added 11, and then G diminished to take us back to F. That's a really nice resolution. E diminished, add 11, G diminished, F major. Now, once we get to that F major, there's going to be a lot going on here. And what I want to do is just, let's listen to it first, and then we'll try to pick apart these chords one by one. We start with that F major. No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions. And if we go through those chords one by one, well, first, let's just take a look at the melody. We want to kind of divorce the melody from the chords here. The melody's very simple. It's just in the key of F. We have the 3rd note of the F scale, and then the root, and then the 4th. So it's 3rd root, 4th, 3rd root, simple. And then we do the same thing, except it kind of switches to minor. We have flatted 3rd root, 4th, flatted 3rd root. So I'm kind of dividing this melody into 2 parts, right? We've got stuff that kind of outlines a major tonic, we've got a major 3rd and a root, and then we have stuff that outlines a minor tonic. So I expect some modal mixture will be involved just by looking at that melody. Now, if you look at the bass line, just look at the bass notes, you'll notice that the first note is going to be F, and then it goes up the notes of the F minor scale. We go to a G, which is shared between F major and F minor, and then we go to an A flat, and then a B flat, and then eventually we end up on a C. And this reminds me of like an opposite of a lament bass. We talked about the lament bass in George Harrison's Something. And a lament bass here would be a walk down from F to that 5th, and whatever way we want to do it. We could kind of get a similar effect by walking down to our 5, but it doesn't have that victorious effect, does it, right? Climbing up is going to give us a little bit more of that successful feel. And that's what's going on here. The bass coming up every single note and actually getting into a little bit of minor territory to get us to that 5 chord. Now, the actual chords here, we have an F major, just our tonic, and then this next chord's a real mess here. We've got an E flat with an added 9 and a sharped 11, but it's all being played over a G. And there's really no way I can play all those notes together on the guitar, so here's my little abbreviated version of it. And if you're wondering where that chord comes from, I would just think of it as being borrowed from mixolydian. It's pretty common to bring in a flat 7 chord while your major tonic is still kind of intact here. And since we still have the major 3rd being present, and all of a sudden there's this flat 7 chord, I feel like it's a good idea to parse that chord as being from mixolydian. Now the next chord is A flat 6, and this could come from the parallel minor, right? It could come from F minor, but I want to think of it as being from F Dorian instead, because if you look at the next chord is B flat 7, and B flat 7 is actually diatonic to Dorian as well. So you could think of this A flat 6 as being borrowed from minor, and then you could think of this B flat 7 as being borrowed from Dorian. I just think it's easier to think of them both as being borrowed from Dorian. Also, you could just say, hey, we took this B flat and we made it bluesy by making it a 7th chord. I personally think that's a completely valid interpretation, because when you just throw that 7th chord in there, it just bluesies up any chord. And not everything has to make harmonic function sense. Sometimes you can just kind of add tension to a chord by adding in something like that flat 7. Now finally, when that's all done, it takes us to our C7, sus4. which is supposed to be like our big tense dominant chord, and it still has tension, right? It does want to take us back to F. You can feel that it's building us up for that. But the fact that it's suspended 4 means it's missing out on the extra tension that's present with that major third. So I really like 7 sus4 chords. To me, they're very like hollow and unresolved, and I don't know, there's just a lot of space in there that I really enjoy. And what's funny here is that, we're supposed to resolve back to F major, right? That's where we were at. And they kind of hint at that, but if you really listen, they just play the F bass note, and then the piano rings out the rest of an F minor chord. So after that surprise resolution to F minor, we bring in a B flat major chord, get a little bit of a Dorian tonality developing, back to F minor, and then we go to that ambiguous chord we saw at the intro. And all of these notes are in Dorian. They're all in F Dorian. And what we end up doing is playing that ambiguous chord again, hanging out there, and letting our ear just kind of reset back to C minor, or E flat major, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's pretty funny because F Dorian and E flat are actually the same key. So we didn't actually perform a key change here, but we certainly have performed a relative modulation, to call F minor our tonic. And then all of a sudden, C minor is now our tonic. And pretty soon, E flat's going to be our tonic. Quite a bit of relative modulation there in just a small amount of time. Now, don't you think it's only appropriate that after all those crazy complex chords, we are left with a mind-numbingly simple format and structure? It's literally just verse, chorus, chorus, end. And come on, these guys know what they're doing. They know how to write complicated structure. Bohemian Rhapsody, it broke every single structural rule for radio play, and it still ended up working. So they could have made something complicated and wrapped all of this into some, arcane 15-minute structure, but do you really think it would become the victory anthem if they had done that? This is supposed to be played right after the title weight fight. This is supposed to be played at the championship match, and everyone's going to be singing along. They don't bore us. They get to the chorus. It's perfectly manufactured for consumption. And even though it is a very commercial and acceptable and well received song, there's just morbid complexity within that chord progression. And I really enjoy music like that. I enjoy music that might sound simple on the outside and is very acceptable and very easy to digest, but if you go deep inside there, it just gets scary. And I feel like that's like my favorite form of art, is it's simple on the outside, but you get deep inside there and you realize there's a lot more complexity than you may have recognized initially. Now I just want to talk about the things that I learned from analyzing this chord progression that are going to stick with me for a while. First off is that ridiculous modulation. If you really listen to it, I just think it's completely unexpected. I mean, I'd heard this song a billion times before, but I never really listened to it. And listening to it, I literally laughed at hearing that surprise C major. We're in the key of E flat, and you've got the dominant chord, it's building you up, and then all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere, the C just to pop you into F. It's really funny. It's a comical and unexpected change, and it works really, really well. I'm also kind of embarrassed at the fact that I never put together this connection between minor 6 chords and diminished 7th chords. Essentially, if you take the 5th of any minor 6 chord and flat it, it all of a sudden becomes a diminished 7th chord. And that's an interesting little unique property there. Diminished chords are weird like that. They have a lot of relationships to other chords like altered dominance. Also, if you take any note of a full diminished chord and you flat any tone in it, it becomes some inversion of a dominant 7th chord. And speaking of diminished, what was really weird to me was that E diminished with an added 11. It's really not that appropriate to be naming diminished chords with added tones on top. A lot of times it's going to be functioning as a 5 chord or something else like that. But really, there's no harm in saying, hey, play a diminished chord and add a high melody tone on top of it. But I really began to question, how much of our vocal melody should we be compressing into our chord vocabulary? If you're in a band and one guitar player is playing a C and your piano player is playing an E and you're singing the note G, well, all together that forms a C major chord. But nobody in the band is actually playing a C major chord. So do you really want to notate that as a C major chord, or do you just want to look at the sheet music and see how it all works out? I think both interpretations are valid. Since I really only play one instrument, I am totally cool with the idea of saying, hey, let's try to compress all of this information and give it one chord name. So I really had a lot of fun, and I learned a lot by going through this chord progression, and I hope you did too. If you did, you have to thank my awesome Patreon supporters for making this video possible and most of my other ones. They have been my sponsors for a while, really the only sponsors I'd like to work with, and they deserve your gratitude and mine. If you'd like to join them, you can. There are links below in the description, but if you can't do that, that's fine. I would appreciate a like, a comment, a subscribe. All that kind of stuff really helps me out. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.